Not being happy with where my life is going, I decided to change it.
Jolene's name has never stopped coming up in conversations about Bad Chad, even as her public presence became quieter. Online, that silence quickly turned into speculation, with countless claims about what happened and why she stepped away. But when you strip out the rumors and focus only on what can actually be confirmed, the story becomes more measured and far less dramatic than the internet suggests. This video looks closely at Jolene's role, what she has publicly shared, and how the idea of a split took on a life of its own, separating documented facts from assumption. Jolene became a recognizable figure to viewers through her association with Bad Chad Customs, a show that centers on Chad Hiltz and his unconventional approach to automotive builds. From the beginning, she was presented as more than a background presence. She appeared on screen, was credited as part of the series, and was commonly understood by viewers as someone closely involved in both the shop and the broader brand. That visibility naturally led audiences to associate her identity with the success and personality of the show itself. Outside of television, Jolene's involvement extended into the business side of things. In published profiles and public-facing materials, she was described as a co-founder of Hiltz Auto Company, reinforcing the idea that her role went beyond media appearances. At the time those profiles were released, she was also referred to as Chad Hiltz's fiancée, which further blended the lines between the personal and professional aspects of their partnership. This dual role, both personal and business-related, helped shape how viewers understood her place within the Bad Chad brand. Because of that history, audiences paid attention when her presence became less visible. When someone who has been publicly tied to a brand, a business, and a show appears less frequently, questions tend to follow. However, understanding Jolene's established role is essential context. It explains why her name continues to surface in discussions and why any perceived change, even without formal statements, became a focal point for online speculation. Beyond television appearances, the clearest insight into Jolene and Chad's relationship comes from formal profiles and published descriptions rather than commentary or fan discussion. In at least one widely circulated interview profile, Jolene was identified as a co-founder of Hiltz Auto Company, establishing her as part of the business structure rather than only an on-screen presence. That same profile referred to Chad Hiltz as her fiancé at the time, a detail that placed their personal relationship into a public, documented context. This kind of source matters because it reflects how the relationship was presented in professional settings, not just how it was perceived by viewers. Business profiles are typically written with cooperation from the subjects involved, which suggests that the information reflected how Jolene and Chad chose to represent themselves publicly at that point. It also explains why many fans viewed them as a combined unit both personally and professionally, rather than as separate figures connected only through the show. Importantly, these profiles capture a specific moment in time. They confirm that Jolene held an acknowledged role within the company and that their relationship status was once publicly described in clear terms. What they do not do is provide updates beyond that period. There has been no equivalent, widely verified follow-up interview or formal statement that publicly redefines that relationship. As a result, these earlier records continue to serve as the primary reference point, even as circumstances may have changed outside the public record. After those earlier profiles, the most concrete indicators of Jolene and Chad's continued association came through public appearances rather than direct statements. Event coverage from the automotive scene in 2022 still showed Chad and Jolene appearing together in connection with builds and shop-related activity. These appearances were documented through event listings, photos, and short write-ups, all of which treated their partnership as ongoing at that point. While these moments were not framed as personal updates, they reinforced the idea that Jolene remained connected to the Bad Chad brand in a visible way. This period is important because it establishes the last widely documented window where their professional connection was publicly intact. There were no announcements, interviews, or press releases indicating a change in status around that time. From an outside perspective, everything appeared consistent with how their relationship and business roles had previously been presented. That continuity is often overlooked in online discussions, which tend to jump directly from earlier profiles to much later speculation. Once those public appearances became less frequent, the lack of new information created a gap. In that gap, assumptions began to form. However, the documented record itself remains limited to what was actually shown and reported. The absence of new appearances does not automatically explain why circumstances changed, but it does mark the point where verifiable information becomes scarce. Understanding that boundary helps clarify where confirmed history ends and where interpretation begins. When public appearances and official mentions slowed, attention shifted almost entirely to online spaces. Viewers who had followed Bad Chad customs closely began noticing changes in social media activity, on-screen dynamics, and branding details, even when those changes were subtle. In the absence of clear updates, discussion forums, comment sections, and YouTube videos started offering their own explanations. Over time, these interpretations were repeated often enough that they began to sound definitive, even when they were not supported by direct sources. This is how a narrative can form without a single confirmed statement. One video references another. A post echoes a comment. Gradually, speculation becomes framed as consensus. In Jolene's case, the lack of new interviews or public clarification allowed assumptions about her status, her relationship, and her reasons for stepping back to circulate freely. Many of these claims relied on reading meaning into silence rather than citing documented changes. It's also important to note how algorithms reward certainty over caution. Content that presents speculation confidently tends to travel farther than content that acknowledges uncertainty. As a result, the most widely shared explanations are often the least restrained. That dynamic has shaped much of the conversation around Jolene and Bad Chad, even though the underlying facts remain limited. Understanding this pattern doesn't resolve the questions, but it does explain why so many conflicting versions of events exist. The speculation didn't emerge from new evidence, it emerged from the absence of it. A key point in this discussion is defining what it actually means for Jolene to have spoken publicly. In this case, there has been no widely verified interview, statement, or press release in which she directly addresses a split or explains personal circumstances in detail. Instead, what exists are indirect signals that are often interpreted as communication, even though they are not explicit declarations. These signals include professional listings, credits, and public-facing profiles that outline her work history and affiliations. Jolene's presence or absence from certain credits, events, or online platforms is sometimes treated as a statement in itself. However, from a reporting standpoint, these indicators describe professional positioning rather than personal explanation. They show how she is publicly associated with projects, not why changes may have occurred. It is also common for third parties to summarize or paraphrase what they believe Jolene has implied, often without direct quotes or primary sourcing. Over time, those summaries are repeated as if they were original statements. This blurring of lines between direct communication and interpretation is a major reason the narrative feels unsettled. From an accuracy perspective, speaking requires a clear, attributable source, her own words, presented in a verifiable format. Without that, conclusions are necessarily limited. Recognizing this distinction helps separate confirmed information from assumptions and keeps the focus on what can actually be supported by the public record. By this stage, much of what circulates about Jolene and Bad Chad exists in the form of online narratives rather than documented reporting. Videos, posts, and comments often present conclusions with confidence, even when they rely on inference rather than evidence. This creates an environment where repeated claims can appear established simply through volume, not verification. Over time, distinctions between confirmed information and interpretation become increasingly blurred. A common feature of these narratives is the selective use of facts. Earlier profiles, appearances, or credits are referenced, but they are often rearranged to support a particular conclusion. Missing details are filled in with assumptions, and the absence of public clarification is treated as confirmation of one theory or another. From a factual standpoint, this approach does not add new information. It repackages existing material with added meaning. It is also worth noting that online discussions tend to flatten timelines. Events that occurred years apart are often presented side by side without context, which can distort how changes actually unfolded. When that happens, normal shifts in professional focus or public visibility are framed as deliberate statements or personal revelations, even when no such statements exist. For viewers trying to understand what actually happened, this makes caution essential. Verified information remains limited to documented roles, past descriptions, and observable public activity. Everything beyond that falls into interpretation. Recognizing where that boundary lies is necessary to avoid mistaking repetition for confirmation or speculation for established fact. Taken together, the available information paints a restrained picture. Jolene's involvement with Bad Chad is clearly documented through past credits, professional profiles, and public appearances, while more recent claims rely largely on interpretation rather than direct statements. The absence of formal updates has allowed speculation to expand, but it has not produced new, verifiable facts. Until Jolene chooses to address the situation directly in a documented setting, the public record remains limited to what has already been established. Understanding that limitation is essential for separating confirmed information from assumptions and for keeping discussions grounded in what can actually be supported.